Sorry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exile and Bookbill's Authors on Tap reading series. We are actually live and in person in the store today with a wonderful event tonight. You guys came, those of you that showed up here today in the audience and that showed up online to view this, we're in for a treat tonight. We're very lucky to have these two authors in here. We're here to celebrate the launch, kind of. It's been out for a couple of weeks, but we still wanted to honor the paperback launch of Christie Tate's group, How One Therapist in a Circle of Strangers Saved My Life. And she'll be in conversation tonight with Gina Frangello, whose book came out this summer as well, Blow Your House Down. And there it is. Christie Tate is a Chicago-based author whose essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, McSweeney's, the Rumpus, and elsewhere. We're going to discuss her debut memoir, Group, which was published in October 2020 by Avid Reader Press, and Reese Whitherspoon selected Group as its November book club pick. Christie is officially an Exile MVP, and she has helped us so much in getting the store recognized and helping us with events, and we can't thank her enough for being here tonight. Gina Franjello, maybe a future MVP, is the author of the memoir Blow Your House Down, a story of family, feminism, and treason. She has also published 4 books of fiction, including A Life in Men and Every Kind of Wanting. She's a creative nonfiction editor at the LA Review of Books, having previously edited at the Rumpus, The Nervous Breakdown, Tri-Quarterly Online, the Coachella Review, and Other Voices magazine, where she founded the book imprint Other Voices Books. You can purchase both of their books through our website, exileandbookbell.com. We ship all over the country, and both authors will be happy to sign their books tonight, have them shipped out, or pick them up at the store. Come by and say hello to us. I'm going to get out of the way. You guys have a great show, and thank you guys for being here.
Thanks, Javier.
Thank you for coming, everybody. So we can kind of we can't really see ourselves like a usual Zoom event. It's a little bit of a distance. So we're just going to pretend you're not there and talk.
That's right. We'll do our thing.
So I just reread Group just like in the last couple of days again. And it's really, I mean, it's such an intense book. It's such an intense read. And it is one of those things that just is so propulsive that you're like tearing through it in a day. And so for those of you who don't know the premise, basically Christie is not fulfilled with her life. And so she goes to see a therapist, and the therapist proceeds to tell her, join this group. And in this group, we don't have any such thing as confidentiality, and we tell all of our secrets to each other. So I'm just going to start there with what made you stay? Like,
that's a great question. I stayed because when I started in the group, I first went to Dr. Rosen, who was the therapist, because my life on paper was doing astronomical things. I was first in my law school class. Everything was set to be all roses, but on the inside, I felt like I was dying, and I knew I couldn't get better on my own. And I wanted relationships. I wanted close friendships. I wanted a boyfriend. I wanted to be closer to my family, and I didn't know how to do it. And I was scared I was going to die alone. As a lawyer, a partner in a law firm, I have fabulous stuff, but I would be alone. And when I got put into group, and Dr. Rosen said, come to group, tell these strangers everything about your life, and I'm not going to make any of them keep your secrets. You'll tell your secrets, but there's no confidentiality other than Dr. Rosen, who's bound by HIPAA. And I was horrified, but also there was enough of what he said that felt like liberation. I had spent most of my life keeping secrets for myself, for other people. And when I heard that there were no secrets, some part of me knew that was going to at least change things. And I stuck around to see what that might be, but it was terrifying.
Right. I mean, it seemed terrifying. Like when I was reading it, and I used to be a therapist briefly, and then I defected to the world of writing, but I was briefly a therapist. And of course, like, you know, it ran counter to everything that I had experience with, but obviously it seemed as though everyone in the group really became tight with one another. And it began originally like you were being given assignments, like call this person every day and tell them what you ate, call this person. And so talk a little bit about like, how did forced intimacy become real intimacy?
Yeah, so early on, I thought, I guess I thought maybe he'd give me a pill to cure my intimacy issues. And he's not a pill guy. What Dr. Rosen said is you need to let people into all these places where you're holding all this shame. And the first place where I was really, really secretive and full of shame was around my relationship with food. And I was in a 12-step program already. I was in recovery for bulimia, but I still had lots of food secrets that I wouldn't tell anyone about. And the first prescription I got was, at the end of the day, call Rory. She was a member of the group. Call her and tell her what you ate. And she's not going to offer you advice. She's not going to say anything except good job, thank you for calling. And Rory, to her credit, said, well, I'll tell you my food too, because she had her own food secrets. And I didn't want to do it. Like the first 5 times, I turkey, cheese, potatoes, peppers, bye, and throw the phone across the room and just like, oh my God, because I'd had the secrets, felt like they were keeping me safe, and it was a lie, and I knew it, but that didn't mean I wanted to tell her. And so we developed this routine, and I would say after about maybe 2 or 3 months, I started to realize that during the day when I would panic about food, which I did often, even in recovery, I started just eating disorder and body dysmorphia. I would think, just get to the end of the day and call Rory. And I knew Rory was struggling with the same things. And I started to experience it less like an assignment and more like a lifeline.
Now, so I was curious, because obviously the book focuses on, you end up in several different groups that Dr. Rosen runs, and you kind of graduate from progressively to different groups. Did you ever experience anybody in any of these groups who it was too much and who had a very negative response to it?
Yes, there were probably along the way, probably once a year, somebody would come in and there's that inaugural session where maybe, and I'm sure I have this impression too, I'm such a people pleaser. I just pretended like I was game for whatever they threw at me, and I didn't have a sense of self. And so it didn't matter. But other people I watched them come in and they would feel like, whoa, this is chaotic. You are all up in my business. Session 1, being asked about your sex life. Of course, I walked in and I felt like I had to answer the questions. And I watched other people just say, this is not for me. This is not my cup of tea. And when I first, maybe after a year, I started to feel better and see some changes in my life. So I kind of had this like a brief period of proselytization about group therapy. But then I realized, oh my God, this is not for everyone. The highly traumatized, there's lots of reasons to keep secrets, for other people, there's lots of people need the cocoon of confidentiality. It's not what I chose, it's not how I got well, but I began to just respect that, and just, if somebody wanted to know what I did, I would tell them, but I stopped the proselytizing, because I watch people come out and say, oh, no, and leave, like maybe last a month at the most.
Right. I mean, it is, when you're reading the book, it's such an intense experience, and we see how you start to get better. And one of the things that you talk about initially is like feeling as though your heart can't attach to things.
Yes.
And which I found fascinating, because I think that's, the question of intimacy is, of course, it's the central human question. And so talk a little bit about, you formed these relationships in the group. How did your life start to change outside of the group?
Yeah, I think what happened was, in group, I started to practice the parts of intimacy I had never even dabbled in, like telling the truth, the full truth. That was totally new to me. I was such a people pleaser from like age 3, like what do you want to play? What do you want to eat? And by age 4, I had all this body shame. So I was hiding what I was eating. So in group, now everyone knows what I eat. There's at least Rory knew every single morsel that went in my mouth. People knew what I was struggling with. And when I started to see that an unclinched Christie who didn't have to hide and figure out what do you want me to say, Gina? Like what jokes are we laughing at? I started to come into my body and come into myself. And what I noticed happening was at school, I was just more comfortable and open. I think there was an openness to me. And by the end of the first year of group, a woman at school who I really loved, I mean, I still had that anxious apartness that I'd sort of always had, but it had lessened. And she said, do you want to come and live with me? And she had this awesome Gold Coast apartment. I lived way out, what felt like way out in Ravenswood. No one lived. We went to Loyola downtown. Nobody lived near me. And I just thought, this is my chance. Like moving closer was such a metaphor. And by then, I wasn't scared. I knew that I could live with someone because I could speak up about what I needed. And I didn't have to hide. The big secret around my food was I was binging on apples every night, like upwards of 10, which is not, you're not gonna die from eating that many apples, but I was really, really embarrassed and really afraid. If Cynthia knows that I'm gonna eat 10 apples, she doesn't wanna live with me. But by then I was freer and could make better decisions. And it just started from there and went from there.
And I think obviously also must have shown you that people would in fact accept you even if you did eat 10 apples, because the people in the group had. It was an interesting thing about what you're talking about. So obviously I wrote a memoir recently too, you know, and in my memoir, I'm holding a lot of secrets as well. There are different kinds of secrets. But I experienced, for me, a lot of that sense of performing to be what I thought other people wanted me to be constantly. And, you know, and my experience of that was often like, this is what women do. And so one of the interesting things about reading group was that it also really brought in, you know, it is something that women, I think, are socially trained to do, but that there were men in the group who were doing it too. And that it's really like the human condition. And so do you feel like one of the reasons that you were able to increase your intimacy with men was that there were men in this group who had the same kinds of issues?
That was a complete shock to me, to look around the room when I started. Like the day I talked about my food, which I remember very vividly, there were 3 men in the group. And you know, when Dr. Rosen turned to me and said, tell the group what you ate yesterday. And I was like, I would rather strip naked. I'd rather show you my bank account. I'd rather show you the dust bunnies under my bed, like anything but that. And then once I was protesting, I knew I had to do it, because what am I doing? Like, and Carlos in the group was like, you have to tell us now. I mean, you've made such a deal about this. You clearly need some help. And I shut my eyes and I was like, blah, 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 and 7 apples. And when I opened my eyes, I looked at Marty and Colonel Sanders and Carlos, and they were nodding at me. And they had food secrets too. And I'd been in a 12-step program where there were men, but it didn't seem like they weren't the same kind of men. It was just like it literally was a revelation to me that men have problems too. I didn't know. I was so entrenched in my women-centered problems that I didn't know. And I didn't know I couldn't even imagine what they were carrying. And so I think it did help me break down hierarchies, binaries, and all kinds of barriers to intimacy.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, that's what I got from the book. So one thing I want to talk about is, so we were just talking about this before y'all got here, but when you write a memoir that is very intimate, and of course in my case I'm writing a memoir about like my life, but in your case we even take it up a notch because you have the consent of this whole group of people to, you know, not just write about their lives, which all memoirists do, but to write about like what they would talk about in therapy, what they, you know. And so it seemed like your book created sort of some shock waves as a result of that. Like, how can this be done? And so will you talk a little bit about the reception to the book versus the reality of like your experience with the people who you wrote about?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the minute I started the book in November of 2015. And I was conscious, obviously, from day one. No one comes to group therapy hoping one of their group mates will write a book about it. That seemed like a problem. And the first hurdle was I thought, well, no one's ever going to read this book. Like, who am I? I'm a nobody. But I really felt compelled to keep working on it. And I sent drafts. I mean, from day one, I told my group, I'm writing about what we do here. No one paid any attention. I would send them drafts. They're like, oh, Christy's got a book idea. And I had other book ideas, and they were terrible. And Dr. Rosen would have me bring in pages to read to the group, and they would shriek like the writing was so new. It was new, and he would always make me bring in the sex scenes, and they were terrible. So anyway, super embarrassing. And so I would send them drafts. That's also, you don't go into group therapy hoping you can read someone's first draft of their memoir about what you're doing in group.
You get a writing group.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, but I always had Dr. Rosen's blessing, and I always felt encouragement from the group. Now, things got real when I got an agent, and then it seemed like she might sell the book. So I was like, hey guys, like this is no longer theoretical. I sent it to all of them again. And one thing I did before I got the agent, it occurred to me like, wait a minute, do I really think this is real or not? I kind of have to commit and act as if it is. And I did one whole draft where I took out anything that was close to their story and not my story. Like all the reasons why each of the characters in the book came to group have been changed.
Okay.
Their names, obviously, their names have been changed. And anything that draft that I did, I had to take a lot of things out. I'm even embarrassed now that they were in there in the first place. Things about Patrice's sex life, because it's interesting. When people come with sex problems, like I want to write about that. Mine were boring. I'm not having sex. But other people were doing lots of cool shit. And I had to take it out because it doesn't belong to me. And so I come to group and I've got an agent and everyone's like, whoa. And there were all different kinds of reactions. And we had a whole process of group. It's kind of still going on because none of us thought Reese Whitherspoon was
right.
Hold up my book, option my book. So now it's like, great. It's almost like the book is like a seventh member of the group that I drug in and made everybody like deal with. But before, everybody had a different reaction, right? Like Dr. Rosen's over there just smiling, he's rubbing his chest, he's so excited, he loves attention, he thinks this is great. And then one woman said to me back in 2015, don't you ever write about me? And I said, okay. And I haven't ever written about her. I know where she belongs in those pages. I know what she gave me and that she has a sensitive situation and I didn't do that. One guy came and said to me, he's complaining to Dr. Rosen. I'm sitting right there. He's like, Christy is exploiting us. She is taking our story. She's going to make all this money on us. And I'm thinking to myself, no one's going to read this book. What are you talking about? What money? I'll be an author. And I said, he'd never read it. And I said, why don't I send you a manuscript? If you feel exploited, let's talk about it. So I send it over the weekend. He comes back the next time and he's like, Christy, you wrote a great book. I think it's going to change lives. And I really feel like I should have been in it more. And I was like, wait, what? He was like naming all these places that he helped me and the things he did with me and for me. And I was like, okay, so you're saying something different. And then people, like the public and people were reacting like, who is this woman telling other people's stories? And I would go to group like super freaked out. Like, are y'all mad at me? What's wrong? What's happening? And they're just like, Max said to me, if I don't care about this, why does some woman in Gurnee care about this? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, I want everyone to like me and like what I did and like my book. And I had to get over that. real fast. So I'm
That's
sure.
like rule number one of memoir writing. Some
Right.
people will think you suck.
Yeah. And people, I certainly, where I landed on that and where I sit now, I understand the concern about privacy. And I have witnessed things in group that are extremely sacred and sublime. And am I allowed to tell you all? Yes. But I wouldn't. I don't need to tell you to get well. I don't carry shame about somebody else's process, but I do feel entitled to tell my own. And I'm sure that there are places where I drew the line somewhere where somebody else wouldn't, and maybe I messed up. There are a couple things in there. I have a couple regrets. One of them is I wish I hadn't named the exact law firm I went to. That's about me. You know why I did it? Because you know why I did it? I wanted everyone to know I'm smart. I had it together. And I thought that naming the law firm would like give me cachet. It's my totally ego. And I regret that the most. Like, why? And now the partners, I'm not saying the partners are reading this book, but it's just like, it was
The partners have read this book.
I mean, I got a couple messages from LinkedIn that were like, hey, but more than that, I did it totally out of ego because I want readers to know I was really smart. I was really like that totally backfired. So and that's not about other people's privacy, but it feels like I learned a lot writing this book, and there are things I would do differently, which is I hope I'm learning and staying open-hearted about that.
So I want to talk about the concept of privacy, right? And because you go into this group, you're told we're gonna disclose everything, and I can very much see, like, not only just from reading it, but conceptually, like how that would sort of like loosen shame. And in your case, it turned out that things that that you hadn't even really thought had made a big impact on you, such as witnessing a friend's father who had drowned, like you didn't even really think it had been that big of a deal in your life, and it turned out that it was a really, really big deal in your life. So what is privacy to you now after the experience with this group? In your normal life, in your professional life, like how do you sort of define privacy, and is it useful? Is it something that people need?
I think I probably don't, in my own head, I don't think of the word privacy. I think of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of going into my group for 90 minutes twice a week. I still go. That's a place I could say whatever I need to say. I could say names, I could say places, dates, I can say it in any volume I want. And outside of that room, there are different boundaries. And even inside that room, I have found that now that I'm a mother, there's ways in which I have different boundaries for my kids and their issues than I do for my own. Even though I do trust my group mates and I trust Dr. Rosen, but if one of my kids says, I don't want you talking about this, well, then we have to talk about, well, mommy doesn't hold secrets and shame, but the amount of detail I get once I get farther from the group and farther from my own body, I have different boundaries and they change. And what I've seen over the years, I've seen people come into group and not everybody does exactly what Dr. Rosen said.
Sure.
I didn't know, I don't hear choice. I just hear do this, and I'm trying to be the valedictorian of group therapy, right? So I'm like,
that's a great
title. we don't tell secrets. Well, I'll tell you everything. And other people have come in and said, one time we got a new member, this was like 2 years ago, and I said to her, it's the first day, and I said, what's your last name? And she said, I don't want to tell you that right now. And I was like, wow, like even the level of your name, what I know now is I have a choice. Even in group, I have a choice about how much to tell, when to tell. And when my editor called me and said, Reese Whitherspoon wants your book, and she said, you can't tell your group. And I was like, oh my God, this is the biggest conundrum. She's like, Reese wants to be the one to announce it. You cannot tell your group. And I was like sweating and having so many feelings. And so I called Dr. Rosen and I said, first I said, do you know who Reese Whitherspoon is? Because you never know. You never know.
Yes, he's a
And
little.
he was like, yes. And I said, well, she's picked my book and I don't totally know what that means. I know it's awesome and I cannot tell the group. And this was July 31st and my book was going to come out in October. And I was like, so technically I'm going to have a secret from the group for about 3 months. I was like, what do you think about that? And he was like, it sounds like you know when it's going to end. You're not going to keep it forever. It sounds like it's good news. You're sharing it with me. You're going to tell your husband. We talked, I would tell my sponsor in my 12-step program, and then you'll tell the group when it's time. And then I was like, I felt like I had permission. But I think there was a time when I was so dogmatic about the secrets thing. I would have been like, well, tell Reese, 7 strangers are going to know all about it. Don't keep secrets. And I just was not willing to do that. So it worked out, but probably because I didn't feel shame. I felt great joy. I didn't feel like, oh, you know, my uncle touched me. I can't tell anybody. It was like, holy cow, a celebrity is going to catapult my book places it was never going to go without her.
Amazing.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a really interesting distinction because, I mean, keeping a secret that's a joyful secret is not the same as keeping a secret that makes you feel lesser, you know,
right.
Or that makes you feel like you're performing or something like that.
Yes, I didn't have to. I will say, in retrospect, that by not telling the group, I didn't have the full support. I don't think I would do it differently, but it was a joyful thing. It was also filled with emotion, like, oh my God. And what I know now, because of the way I operate in group and as a person, big emotions, I feel like my group mates help me just sort of like handle it until it can sort of like fit inside my body. And it was sort of not having their support as this gigantic thing is happening in my career. It was lonely. It wasn't fatal or lethal, but it definitely was lonely. And then I didn't tell them until, you know, the day it came out. And part of me is just like, I wonder if I could have done that. I have a question about whether I could have had more joy, just like I would have, if sharing with the group a shame halves the shame. I wonder too, if sharing with the group doubles the joy. I don't, that sounds simplistic, but I have a question. I hope I get the chance to find out again, you know, when a celebrity wants my next book.
So which will happen.
I mean, hello, universe.
So obviously we've been through this whole Me Too situation.
Yeah.
And just, I don't even know if I have a specific question, but obviously there is a lot of sexual information shared in the group, and Dr. Rosen explicitly tells a lot of people to share sexual information in the book and, you know, will share it. Did any of you process any of this related to that movement? Do you feel like anybody felt as though any of that had to do with what was happening in the group?
Yeah, that's a great question. No one has asked me that. And yes, even before Me Too, there have been voices all along who have said, wait a minute, I hear Dr. Rosen encouraging explicitness and specificity, like, where did he touch you? Where did you lick? You know, and that's titillating. It's titillating. And I have mostly been in co-ed groups. What does it mean to be a vulnerable person? I mean, are we vulnerable? Like, if I'm talking about sexual trauma or a sexual ambiguous situation, and I'm giving graphic details in the service of not holding shame, but am I also titillating the men? And Dr. Rosen, that's a question. And in every group I've been in, there has been at least one, if not two voices saying, wait a minute, Christy giving all this detail, who does that serve? And is this good for her? Or is this good for me? And another piece of that is having all this information, all this sex stuff out in the atmosphere. It's like, sometimes, you know, I haven't had this experience, but let me say this. I've gone to group before, and a man in the group will say, you know, I thought about Christy in this sexual situation, and it's scary, and it feels a little bit like maybe he used material from something I said.
Right.
That for me, that's the benefit of being in a group with women. Like people ask me all the time, could you have gotten well if you had a one-on-one therapist? It's an unknowable question. I assume yes, but what I do know is that I would have never, I don't think I could have been as uninhibited around my sexual trauma if I was alone in a room with a man like Dr. Rosen, who's an authority figure. I would have been performing for him or being cheeky about it. I don't think I could have had the emotions, the body connection, and all the information come out. I needed the women in the circle and the men too, but more the women for safety.
Are we doing on time? I mean, I was wondering, because obviously we're assuming that some people who are here have not read the book. I was wondering if you wanted to like read a few pages.
Oh yeah, sure. I would love to. Oh my gosh, it's so. I always, you know, depending on my mood, what I'll read. All right, so here's sort of into the book when I got another prescription. My very first prescription was to call Rory every night and tell her everything I ate during the day. And we did that, and she ended up doing it with me too. We probably did that for 5 years, and then we moved to email, which is different, but I still felt held. And my second prescription was when I was complaining about insomnia. The minute I committed to group, I stopped sleeping through the night. It was so terrible. And so the second prescription I got was to address the insomnia. Dr. Rosen gave a lot of prescriptions, though rarely for drugs. He wasn't a pill guy. Carlos got a prescription to bring his guitar to group and play a song for us to help allay his fears about expanding his practice. Patrice got a prescription to rub strawberries on her husband's stomach, lick them off, and then report the results to group. And because Dr. Rosen thought that the prescription Rory's internist gave her for anxiety was suppressing her sexual feelings, he gave her his own. Put one pill between each of your toes while your husband goes down on you. Sorry, it's a little graphic. Okay, we're gonna lighten up here. Okay, now you're like in group. Okay. I'd been following my prescription to call Rory every night to tell her my food for a few weeks. I no longer cried after I hung up the phone, and my apple consumption was down to a modest 5 per night. It was time for another prescription. Can I have something for my insomnia? I can't think straight. My second year of law school was underway, and when I wasn't sitting in group, I was interviewing with Chicago's biggest law firms for a summer internship, which I hoped would lead to an offer for full-time employment. Not sleeping well for weeks meant that fatigue pressed against my skull, making it hard to stay awake for classes and interviews. At Winston Strawn, I pinched the inside of my arm to stay awake while a white-haired managing partner described the time he argued before the Supreme Court. I'd already confessed my eating was a hot, steamy mess. Now I admitted I couldn't sleep. I was a newborn baby stuck in a 27-year-old's body. Dr. Rosen sat up and rubbed his hands together like a mad scientist. Call Marty tonight before you go to sleep and ask for an affirmation. Before or after I call Rory to tell her what I ate. Doesn't matter. I'm going to the opera tonight, so call me before 7, Marty said. At 6:50 that night, I stood on the train platform at Belmont, exhausted from the long day of classes and a 5-hour interview at Jones Day, where again, I'd pinched the inside of my arm to stay awake while talking to senior partners. I dialed Marty's number as the wind slapped my hair into my face. I'm calling for my affirmation, I said into the phone as the lights of an incoming northbound train rose toward the platform. You have great legs, Toots. Marty wasn't skeevy like Colonel Sanders. He wept every time he opened his mouth in group and seemed genuinely astonished when we asked to know more about what made him so sad. He always said, I just can't believe anyone is listening to me. I laughed into the roar of the oncoming train and prayed his words would work like an extra strength Ambien. The next morning, I hesitated before opening my eyes, afraid to see that it was only 2 a.m. I heard morning sounds, my neighbor's door slamming, bird song, a car starting. I opened my left eye and saw the clock, 5:15. I'd gotten an unprecedented 7 hours of sleep. I pumped my fist like a champion. Maybe Dr. Rosen was brilliant. Ew, don't tell him I read that section. I don't want to get a big head.
I'm sure the audience has questions, but I'm just going to ask one more, which is, so how many years have you been doing group now?
I started August 30th of 2001.
And I guess my question is, will you ever stop? Or is this, this part of your life?
Yeah, that's what my mom wanted to know after she read the book. I feel like I'm allowed to leave. It's not like Keith Raniere. What I do feel for myself is I'm not in crisis, but I still want support. And it feels, if I think about it too long, it feels a little bit indulgent. It's definitely a luxury and a privilege to spend this time and money to work on relationships for 180 minutes a week. And there's still things I'm hungry for in my life. I have good friends, I have a marriage, I have children, I want to keep them, but I have things I want to do creatively. I see a lot of things coming at me on the horizon, like menopause and elderly parents, and I can't imagine just undercutting the support I have. So there's that, but also as it pertains to this group, I'm really attached. I'm really attached to the people and Dr. Rosen too, but last weekend we celebrated a wedding of one of my group mates, and I think about like, what if I'd quit a year ago? I wouldn't have seen the end of his story. Well, it's not the end, it's really the beginning, but we didn't tell him that, you know. It's like, yeah, congratulations. I want to know how the stories of my group mates end, and I want to be with them, and they continue to come back. Even as it is, I've been in almost 20 years. Yeah, 20 years almost. And half of the group has been there longer than I have. And I watch them, their lives, it seems at one point it'll seem like, well, they've got everything now. And then the sky opens and there's more to reach for. And then we're right there to help them. And I still want that. And if it stops working like that, I hope I do leave, but it's hard to picture right now.
I do have one more, I'm gonna lie. So that just made me really curious, because I realized, I don't know who said this in the book and I dismissed it, but it sounds like people from the group are not supposed to socialize outside of the group, because you said, like, if I were to have quit group, I would have missed that.
Yeah.
Do people in the group also go out together socially outside of group, or is that not thought to be a good idea?
That's a great question. Actually, I've done a lot of conversations with therapists who have a lot of feelings about this book and about Dr. Rosen, which I respect. But one of the things that I've learned through the publication of the book, one of the great norms of group therapy is not fraternizing outside. Dr. Rosen, however, has us calling people. I went to Russia with Patrice. I went with my friend Emily on a bike riding trip in Wisconsin. Like, we're all in each other's lives, we're crying on each other's couches. So that's very unusual. But because it's the only family I've ever known, you know, like, your family doesn't seem weird until you go to someone else's house and they're like, we never use garlic. And you're like, what? So it's like that. And what I didn't understand that. But one of these therapists, I did this talk, and she was just like giving me the side eye. And I was like, I would love to hear, I'm obviously not fragile. Like, what's on your mind? And she was like, I run groups and we don't let them have any contact outside of group, because then all of the relationship and all of the intensity happens in the group room and nobody misses anything. So if two people go out and do something, then they've created some chemistry, or even if it's platonic, whatever, and then they come back in, and now they have to report to the group, and what if it doesn't come in, and like, it dilutes the power of the group, which I totally understand. And then she said to me, she was like, you know, I found that sometimes I have patients who like she was talking about when people graduate from group, you know, it's like this, I have this patient and she got married and she was telling her group everything. And it was really like, it was energy she should have put into her marriage. And I totally understand that. And I hear what she's saying. And I don't know how to translate that into my own. I think my husband would say, I get plenty of her energy. please keep going to group. So, but we are definitely allowed, but it does get a little tricky if somebody leaves group and like, it's like you leave the church and someone else still goes every Sunday and you're sort of like, I'm a believer, I'm not. It's like, I still have relationships with people who've left. And it's always a little bit weird, especially if they've had a falling out with Dr. Rosen. And I'm like, I just wrote a book about him, and it's a little bit, it's something I have to work through in every relationship for more patience. Worth it, but it becomes a factor.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I would imagine just even what you talked about in terms of like, you know, jealousies can form because, you know, it's a group, you know, and anything other than a dyad, you can have the creation of like, why is this person closer to that one than they are to me? And I feel left out of the group and all of that. But I would imagine that the way your group functions is that is all then brought to the group and used to uncover other layers of how does that mirror how you feel outside of this group.
Totally. Like, where did you get the idea? Why are you invested in being on the outs? And it can be very painful. I've been part of subgroups where we're sort of like coming in there, swinging our dicks around, like, oh, we all got coffee. And then I've been on the outs, and both of them, you have to, I have, my experience is I have to examine something's going on there. And it's possible that a subgroup could bring back energy and goodness. And it's possible it could just be like a mean girl toxicity. And I'm talking about like, that's terrible, mean girl. Like it's a toxic, exclusionary thing that I have absolutely participated in and had to look at, is this who I want to be in the world? Why do I do this, and where else have I done it? And it can be a real reckoning.
Right. Well, I feel like we should maybe see if the audience, and like, excuse me as I throw my face into the computer, has questions. Should we do that? Should we play with the computer? If they don't, I have another.
I know, do I get to ask Gina questions?
Oh, sure. Are there any, can you guys read that?
Oh, let's see. These are comments. Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
So Christy was a former Booksellers on Tap guest for us, and she was fantastic. Do you have any current or past or just books that you think, both of you, that you think people need to have in their hands?
You know, I will say earlier this summer, I read Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. And I heard Mira Jacob say it was a comedy of manners. And it's such a, it's about trans bodies and gender, and it feels very light on the surface, but it grapples with gender and roles and parenthood and normative sexuality and gender, and I could not get enough of it. It feels really deceptively important and a really fun read, like just because it's topical, and it really helped me imagine the struggles of people who live in bodies that don't look and feel like mine.
That's my friend Zoe Zolbrad has been raving about it.
Oh.
I really want to read it. You know, the book that I discovered recently that I've been kind of talking up to everyone is Nina Renata Aaron's Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls. And I had meant to read it when it came out, but I think it's a very intense look at life, living with someone who's an addict and the issues of codependence, and how it cycles through like a family of origin to a relationship and etc. But her writing is just beautiful and really intimate, and I love that about group as well. Like I am just a glutton for intimate books, like books that just make you feel like you have gotten, you know, you've gotten into the guts of a matter. And I think Nina's book is really amazing like that. And we were just talking before you all joined us about how everyone in the world should read the Neapolitan Quartet, starting with My Brilliant Friend. So that was our little sub conversation that now you all are part of.
Yes.
And if you have not read those, get to it.
Yes, yeah. I also love, I was thinking of the last book I devoured. I think it's called Leaving Isn't the Hardest Part by Lauren Hough, Hough. It's so stunning. It's hilarious and heartbreaking. And it's essays about, she had been in the army. She had been in a cult. She grew up in a cult. It was called The Family. Whatever, the Fleetwood Mac guy.
Oh, that I know about
Yeah, yeah. And she had lived all over the world, and it was like, and it wasn't, how could it possibly be a lighthearted book? It's not glib about her experiences, but it really lifts the curtain. I mean, thank God she survived. She had experiences in the army, which she kind of compared to The Family, and just her scrappy spirit, all that at one point she's living in her car in DC, and she still has a sense of humor. She still built a life for herself and community. And I think I wish more people were talking. It feels like a book that does all the things we want like our children to do, or ourselves, like dig deep and make the life that is being denied by institutions go around them and do it anyway.
Yeah. It's fascinating that you said that, because that's one of those books that like Amazon has like often bought together with my book. So I've been wanting to read it.
Yes.
I've been wanting to read it. So I will now.
All right, so can I ask Gina a question? Okay. So I'm a huge fan of your book, and I'm wondering, I guess I have so many questions, but let me narrow it down.
You can ask
Okay.
You only get two.
Okay, two.
three.
I need more wine.
This is a question that I get all the time, and I'm more asking, did you get this question, and did you know you were going to get it, and did you know how to answer it? Which is, why did you write this book?
Right.
I kind of don't understand that question, even though I get it like twice a week still. What's your answer, or your relationship to the question?
Yeah, I talked about that a lot in interviews actually. Parts of my book were essays that I had published already that were then broken open in order for me to not make them lies of omission. So for those of you not familiar with my book, one of the strains in my memoir is that I had an on and off clandestine affair for 3 years. And so when you're doing that, you basically are, saying hello to someone is a lie, no one really knows you. And while that, both before that was going on, when I was struggling in my marriage, but not admitting it, and then while that was going on and going off and going on and going off, I was publishing essays, because that's what writers do. And I was often publishing essays about my parents and caretaking my elderly parents, which I would definitely recommend you stay in group for elderly parents and menopause and all of these great things, people, that I have now been through. But so, some of it was that I desired to go back and sort of make those essays whole.
Yeah.
But other parts of my memoir were things that I was originally writing in secret. I thought they were a journal. And I guess in some ways it's not that dissimilar from what you were doing. You were just telling your group about it. In my case, my group is my writing group. And I had done a reading where what was mandatory is that you had to read something that was risk-taking in first person and nonfiction. So I read this little excerpt of what I believe was my journal, and there was a lot of response to it. And so I ended up bringing about 60 pages of this material to my writing group and saying, like, I'm writing this essay collection about my parents and caregiving my parents, like, but do you think this is anything? And they were like, honey, you need to rethink your book, And so, so they really encouraged me there. And and it was interesting because until pretty far in the process, I still wasn't sure whether I would actually pursue publication. And I eventually, I mean, it kind of came down to being as simple as that. If I was this afraid to put this stuff out into the world, there were a lot of other women and men out there who were probably even more afraid than I was. Like, I live in a literary, progressive, like artistic world where people are pretty forgiving of, you know, ambiguities and mistakes and so forth. And, you know, a lot of people don't live in that world and live in a world where they have utter secrecy about so many things in their lives. And I don't just mean infidelity, because obviously there's a secretive nature around that to begin with, and that's toxic. But you know, I also write about having had breast cancer. I write about, you know, chronic pain. I write about a lot of different aspects of being a middle-aged woman. And the, like, you know, full throttle catastrophe of everything hitting at once, of like aging parents and parenting your children and all of these things, you know, sexual awakenings in midlife, and then, you know, right on the heels of that, a bilateral mastectomy and so forth. And I remember that even when I was going through cancer, and I would write anything about it, even something like very innocuous on Facebook, I would get messages from women who were like, no one I know except my husband knows I had cancer. You know, or I could never go out in public, like, without my wig, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I, who had just gotten through finally admitting to this affair, and so I knew what, like, earned shame was. I was like, why are all these people ashamed of things that, you know, are not their fault? Like people are ashamed of their bodies in every way, like not just their sexuality or not just their secret sexuality, but afraid of their body dysfunctions, their bodies aging, and particularly women, I think. And so I ended up feeling like, you know, my fear is tiny compared to what some people's fear is out there, and that I needed to put the book out there in the world so that people would see that they were not alone.
Yeah, in my mind, I created a syllabus. I'm not a teacher, but when someone taps me on the shoulder to teach a women's study class or literature, I want your book, and I want 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo, and I want animal in there too, but I probably nonfiction, just talking about like what it's really like. And what I loved most about your book was it wasn't a story about breast cancer or infidelity or aging parents or reckoning with class in the past. It was all of that, because that's how life is.
That's how life
and
is. Exactly.
I felt like it was like not thin slicing, because that would have been a lie, right?
That was exactly, I mean, you know, and this is, I'll stop talking after this, and it's totally not about my book, but you know, you see this from therapy, right? It's like, if only we had one issue, if only, you know, it's just like, that is not how life works. And the older you get, the less that's how life works, right? You know, so like when you're a kid, maybe your problem really is like one of your parents or both of your parents, but like the older you get, it all intermingles, and there is no one without the other, and we exist in loops. And so I wanted to bring that to a book, and I feel like there have been a lot of wonderful, like beautiful memoirs about what it is to be a young woman whose life is unraveling, and comparatively very few books. Like, you could find a book about breast cancer, you could find a book about someone who had an affair, you could find a book about getting a divorce, but like what about when all these things, and then your parent dies, and then, you know, like all of this is happening at one time. And I just wanted, I think that's life. I think that's all these women's lives out there.
The mess and the glory of it all. Totally.
Exactly.
Are we out of time?
One more question.
Yeah, I do have one more.
Oh, God.
My favorite part of your book is the opening. And I remember standing in a bookstore, and I opened the first page, and I was like, what is she doing? And I'm like all in. and I hadn't bought it yet. And I think I really did gasp in the aisle. And I just want to know, was that always the beginning? If anybody doesn't know, I guess you describe it and then say when that became the beginning.
So it's called The Story of A. Both Lit Hub and the New York Times have run the full chapter, so you can see it online.
Okay.
It is basically a collection of A words, like anything from aphorism to adultery, to asshole, like all these A words, and connecting them to conceptions about adultery, particularly the adulteress, throughout literature, psychology, law, all these different areas of life, as well as, just popular cultural, issues. And it's not really about me per se. I mean, I'm its narrator, but it doesn't have any specifics about my life. And the reason I ended up opening with it was the very last thing I wrote in the book. I wrote it at Ragdale when I completely revised my entire memoir in 2 weeks without the permission of my editor. So, I threw that in there because I've been taking notes throughout the writing and revising, and I had all these stats that I've been taking, that had been informing my understanding of my life, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately I was like, this book is about me, but this book is not about me. Like I'm just a lens you're looking through, and this is what you're looking at. And so I think I just wanted to put that out there because I was like, if someone just wants to read a book about this happened to me, you're going to get lots of this happened to me. But if you're not interested in this other stuff, this isn't the book for you. And I believe that like an opening sort of is a template for how to understand what you're about to read. And so that to me felt like the best opening, because I was sort of like, you need to be interested in more than just kind of like the sordid details of my life for this to be a book you're going to dig.
Yeah, it was expert.
Thank you.
I kind of want to steal it. My letter will be B though.
So, well, look, I really stole the concept from my husband, Rob Robert, is also a writer, and his fifth book was also a memoir after being a fiction writer. And he said at one point during his writing process, the notes are the book. And that was how the Story of A came to be, is I was like, here's all my notes. Wait, the notes are the book. And so.
Oh my God, master class here, friends. Amazing. So,
we work.
Does anybody out there have any questions that they want to ask Christie so that like the heat is off me?
Yes.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yes,
thank
thanks
you
everybody
all for coming. It's been really nice to sit in a bookstore. I'm like overjoyed.
And I'm glad you're sitting in our bookstore. Thank you guys so much for showing up. Everybody here for showing up, and everybody out there for showing up. We have copies of both books on hand, ready for both Gina and Christie to sign and send out to you guys. You come by and pick them up. ExileandBookbill.com, or just give us a call here, go to our website. Thank you guys so much. This was fantastic. It was a great conversation. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Bye, Indy.
Yes.
What?